Hello there, and welcome to what I finished in January 2024, a hopefully monthly series that I plan on doing on this channel. We're just gonna kind of get through what I did this month, and then kind of go into what I added onto my backlog, whether it's a movie, a show, or a video game, whatever it is that I added. So I started out this month of January by watching Ferrari on January 2nd. I really enjoyed this movie. There's a lot of times where racing movies, they don't do that well, either critically or commercially, which I mean is kind of an obvious thing. But this one I think had a little bit more enticing people to go watch it. Like, obviously it's directed by Michael Mann, which is one of the big names in Hollywood, but he usually does crime, drama, thriller, action movies. So this is kind of a bit of a ways away from what he normally does. But he's been working on this for a while. Some sources say it's been 20 years, some say it's 30, but either way, he's been trying to make this movie for a really, really long time, and he's only just gotten to making it now. And the end product is really solid. I do think that there's a great balance between kind of showing Enzo's life as a businessman and then his life as a husband, as a father, and things like that. And I do think that allows the movie to kind of cater to both audiences, where the racing fans can get into it because of all the sequences that they put on display, which are probably some of the best sequences that I've seen in a racing movie. Like, especially compared to Gran Turismo. It's like Gran Turismo does something different with how it shoots itself, but the thing is with this movie is that it's kind of just more the standard sort of way of conveying speed and cars going fast, you know. And I really enjoy, especially the last sequence that gets very graphic in terms of racing material. And I watched that, and it was very interesting because I ended up finding out through an interview that Michael Mann did, that he was based off of, or it was kind of inspired by the incident that happened in Le Mans in 1955-56, which is one of the biggest accidents in auto racing. It's one of the biggest civilian casualties that's ever happened, and it almost stopped racing in its entirety, especially at Le Mans. But I mean, the movie in that way is also kind of its time. It's dangerous. Like, motorsport was dangerous back then, and especially in the 1950s, because that was still a decade before they even thought about changing the cars to make them safer, because they got to the point in the 60s where the cars were so fast that the safety wasn't keeping up. So they kind of had to start incorporating that. And really, it took them 50 years to figure all that stuff out. And even now, they're still working out some of the kinks, because as much as they do in terms of safety, it keeps getting more and more dangerous because luck, I guess bad luck in that circumstance. But the racing sequences I really loved. But what I was really interested about was seeing what the other side of the movie offered. And that was a very big focus on the relationship between Enzo and his former wife. Because the only reason why they were basically together was because of the business side of things. Because his wife was the one that was mostly in charge of tracking money and making sure that things are good with their bank. Obviously, that's a bit difficult, especially when your husband is not only spending more than he makes, but also is having an affair with someone else, or has been having an affair in this case. Because instead of going throughout his whole life, the movie focuses on one specific summer, which makes it very different from other biographical pictures about people. There are certainly ones, at least on the racing side of things, where they do it over events. So the most recent example I would say is Ford versus Ferrari. That kind of goes over a specific year in time, and even then they kind of go over some other years before and after the main race that they follow. But yeah, I mean, Penelope Cruz does a fantastic job as Enzo's wife. I think just the shock value it gives about literally not even 5 minutes into her being on screen, like the shock value that there is and the level of quality that she brings to the role was a bit shocking in a way, but in a good way. And then Adam Driver's performance as Ferrari, I think at first, on the surface level, it's a little weird, but I think he actually does a really good job portraying who Enzo was, because yeah, Enzo was not really that good of a person. Even when you kind of look back on what he said about his competitors in racing, he didn't think very kindly, especially of the Western Europeans and the British and people like that. So I would say overall the movie did a really great job kind of approaching Enzo's life in a way that it makes sense and is more reflective on who Enzo was and how he kind of did business. And I think it just overall was one complete package. Obviously, it's not for everyone. I'm obviously a little bit biased because I am a racing fan. So for me, it was a great movie. I don't know how much people are interested in that kind of stuff, because as much as, like, for me, I got all that I wanted out of it and more. But some people aren't obviously interested in the racing side of things. If they're not, then obviously this movie probably isn't for them. But then again, I also don't know why they would be interested in watching the movie in that case. What's next? I was able to get through a couple of shorts on January 26th, one of which was the Windshield Wiper, which I believe won an Oscar for Best Animated Short. I think it was 2 years ago. And this what I kind of wanted to use as like my starting point of trying to have kind of a Oscar watch log sort of thing, because there are a few movies that I need to get through, and it kind of just gives me an excuse to do it. The Windshield Wiper, though, it was very interesting because I watched it, and less than 5 minutes in, I realized that I've watched it before. I think it's a really interesting display of kind of how love is sort of seen as in the modern day. Like, love is a very difficult thing to define, first of all, but I think it's also because it's so multifaceted and it's so dependent upon how people perceive it and how people kind of take it in. And it kind of shows all that, and it shows the beauty and the absolute terror of love, and how it could be amazing one minute and absolutely disgusting the next, and it kind of depends on what it's talking about, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, whether it's something else. It depends on the circumstance, and regardless, it just says a lot. And I it's really weird because I don't normally recommend people short films, but I feel like this is one of the ones where I kind of just be like, watch this, because it's very representative of today's times, and it kind of goes a certain route of explaining what love is to some people, and whether or not it's real or fake to some or others, or things like that. And then the other one I watched right after that was Puparia. I hope I'm saying that right. It was 3 minutes long. It was very artsy. I think visually it was really, really great. Unfortunately, that was about it. There are a lot of things subtextually that happen in it, but obviously that you don't get much help. So it's kind of the way that short stories do it, where they kind of show you it and they let you figure it out yourself, which in a lot of cases I do like. I think it's just with this one, it was 3 minutes, so it doesn't give you a lot of time to register kind of what's going on, and that's kind of what I am feeling like right now, trying to remember what I recall for it. But I think that was the general gist. obviously not a lot in terms of things I watched, but at the same time, took a little bit of a break. There's nothing wrong with that. However, just because I barely watched anything doesn't mean I didn't add anything to my backlog. So we're going to quickly just go over some of them. The first one was Race for Glory, which is a racing biopic following rivalry between Audi versus Lancia in the Group B rally racing era, which is notoriously one of the most dangerous and most fatal eras in rally racing, both in terms of driver casualties and crowd casualties, just because of how big and popular it was in the 80s. Unfortunately, I wanted to see this in theaters, but it wasn't. It was a very small selection of theaters that it was in, and there were nowhere near me. And right now, I'm not willing to rent it or anything, so it's just kind of there on my backlog. Next one is Studio Trigger's Delicious in Dungeon. Mostly because it's a Studio Trigger anime, and usually they're pretty high quality. Unless you're drawing in the Franks, I can't explain that one. It looks fun. It's basically just the title, They eat lots of food, and it's obviously a fantasy anime. The art style is similar to one of Trigger's last animes, which was Little Witch Academia. I think it's actually made by the same... I think it's directed by the same person, so that would actually make sense. But the interesting thing about this is that it was simulcasted in English and Japanese on Netflix, which is something people are pointing out because that almost never happens, especially with anime. And I don't know, with something as high profile as that, it kind of makes sense that it would be simulcasted in two languages at the very least. So that's kind of good to see. But, I mean, it's on the list. I'm willing to give it a shot. People seem to be enjoying it too. So, honestly, it just kind of throw it in. Why not? And then the other anime we have is Metallic Rogue, because that is a futuristic cyberpunk sort of anime. And it's also, weirdly enough, a mecha anime, which I don't think I've ever watched any mecha anime, but I think this would be a good one to get me into it, because I really, really like cyberpunk stories and cyberpunk worlds, because I just think what they do with the technology in terms of creating a world and using it to deliver world building is actually really, really cool, and that's why I'm interested in something like Cyberpunk 2077, because that's now at a playable state, and it has the exact sort of world that I like. We have a few more. There's Hazbin Hotel, which is probably the biggest one and the one that I'm most inclined to watch on the editions list that I have here, because I have probably watched the pilot at least half a dozen times, partly because of how good that pilot is, which is completely free and available on YouTube. And that's pretty much how it got picked up. Ironically, it got picked up by A24, which they're starting to make the rounds a little more than they did when they picked it up a couple years back. It's animated. It's an adult animated show. It's also a musical, so it's a lot of different things. And I think that the unfortunate thing is that, again, it's obviously because it's animated, but it's adult. People are kind of like, how could you let my children watch this? It's kind of like, if you pay attention to the age rating, you would know what audience it's for and why your children should not be watching it, which is kind of the same problem that the video games have. I hope it's good. I think as of recording this, the last episode comes out in the next coming days, so all of them will be available to me to watch, basically. It's just sitting down and finding and make sure I just sit down and just watch it. Then there's NASCAR Full Speed, the documentary from Netflix, following 9 of the playoff drivers from the 2023 season. I've heard it's actually pretty good, and it's actually getting people interested. I mean, currently, as of recording this as well, it's the 5th most popular show on Netflix, which is a really interesting sort of thing to notice and to see, because it's NASCAR. You know, they've been having a hard time attracting new fans, and this is kind of like pulling a Formula One Drive to Survive. Ironically enough, it's also done by Netflix. But I mean, it's also different from Drive to Survive because they kind of have a more transparent appearance than Drive to Survive, because some seasons of Drive to Survive are just not. They fabricate stuff in some seasons. I think it was the third or fourth season of Drive to Survive that they fabricated, and that was just terrible. People are saying really good things, that it's good that NASCAR is finally doing some publicity and doing a docuseries following some of the drivers, because they need to let their drivers have a personality, which is kind of one of the problems that they've been running into, and that's kind of why they haven't had many people watching NASCAR all that much in the past few years. And then lastly, there's Eastward Octopia, damn it, which is a DLC to the game Eastward, which came out towards the end of 2021. I love this game. It is the first ever indie game that I sat down and watched the trailer for and went, I'm buying this game. And luckily for me, I ended up really, really enjoying it. I think the longer I go, the more I not only respect it, but think how good it legitimately is. Some of the sequences in that game are just stunning, both visually and kind of just as a package. And you know, people at launch, they kind of were like, "Well, it's too story centered," and it's because it's a puzzle. It kind of has puzzle gameplay in it, and I guess people didn't like that it was story centered or something like that. I really enjoyed it because I usually pay more attention to that side of video games than anything else these days. But I'm really interested to play the DLC because it's technically a continuation of the base game. You're able to play it separately from the base game, but it's essentially just kind of building off of what happens at the end of the base game, which I really like because they kind of tease that a little bit, that there could be something else they do with that. And luckily they technically have done it, but you can still play this without obviously playing the original game, even though you absolutely should before then, because these characters are great. All the ones that are probably in the DLC are all the ones that I probably love. Most of the characters that are actually in the game are ones that are really great. And I mean, it's one of the games that I don't talk about that much, but I really wish I did, because I love this game a lot. So much so that, you know, I obviously bought the base game. I obviously bought the DLC. I then also bought Watson Colt's art book for it, which was not cheap. And I've even contemplated buying the physical Switch version of it so that I have it physically. So I've already spent $100 on this game, essentially. And I just keep digging a hole. But that's because I love it so much. And when you love things, you tend to get a bunch of stuff related to it and start hoarding shit. And that's about it. I think that's a total of, 7. And I watched 3 things. This is pretty much my predicament whenever I go into each month. My backlog ends up being bigger than my watch log, and it becomes a problem when you have, I think it's over 700 to 800 different movies and shows to watch, and then 50 or so games to play. So that's gonna be it for this month. Hopefully I'll get better at this, and I'm actually gonna be very mad if it's over 20 minutes long. Thanks for everyone who got here to the end. Hopefully I'll keep on doing this every month, and hopefully eventually we'll kind of get it to a point where it's relatively fast flowing and nicely moving along to each different thing that I kind of want to go over and talk about. So I hope to see you all next month, and then I'll also put some other stuff down in the description for you to check out. All right, I'm gonna go now. Okay, yeah, bye bye.